Sometimes, the people who say they need you most are the ones who never truly see you. She thought she was flying home for Thanksgiving, but it turned out to be the beginning of a homecoming to herself. After a lifetime of quiet giving, she finally chose to stop knocking on doors that never opened and lit a candle for herself instead. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. I wasn't supposed to spend Thanksgiving in a motel off Route 99 with a slice of pumpkin pie in a takeout box and the low hum of a vending machine outside my door. I was supposed to be in Chicago. With them. They told me they wanted me there. Swore it wouldn't feel right without me. It wouldn't be the same, Mom, Brian had said. Too bright, too rehearsed. The kids keep asking about you. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe I might still matter, so I said yes. I booked the flight, ironed my navy cardigan, packed the gifts-to-go books for Ellie and Jack, a little tin of truffles Jessica used to love. I even paid the extra $12 for a seat with more legroom. I packed early, checked the weather, left the porch light on. I didn't tell my bridge group I was flying out. Maybe I didn't want to jinx it. Or maybe some part of me was afraid they wouldn't really be there. Thanksgiving morning, I made it to Eugene Airport with time to spare. The terminal buzzed with families and overstuffed carry-ons. I sat near Gate 3, warming my hands with a cup of tea, nodding at an older woman knitting quietly beside me. When the flight attendant called for boarding, I smoothed my coat and stood up, a little slower than I used to, but steady. This was supposed to mean something. This time, I was invited. This time, I belonged. The plane landed around 3. I made my way to arrivals, suitcase wheels ticking over tile, and stood beneath the big silver baggage claim sign. Coat folded over my arm just so. I watched couples reunite, children rush into hugs, signs wave, and balloons bob. No one came for me. 20 minutes passed, then 40. I kept checking the screen, then my phone. No new texts. No missed calls. Just the last message from Jessica, still sitting there from 2 days ago. We'll be there. Kids, can't wait to see you, I had replied. Flight arrives at 3:10. Can't wait to hug everyone. No answer. I was just about to sit down when my phone buzzed. Not a call, not even a message. A notification. Social media. I don't care for it. Not really, but sometimes they post photos before they think to reach out. So I opened it. And there they were. Brian in the sweater I gave him last Christmas. Jessica radiant and relaxed, glass raised. Ellie and Jack at the table candles, mashed potatoes, a turkey, a pie that wasn't mine. The caption, full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours. I looked at the picture. I didn't see my seat. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp or drop my phone. I just folded my coat back over my arm and walked out of the terminal. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Just emptied out. Like someone had gently erased the lines where I used to be. Outside, I passed the taxis and shuttle vans. I didn't have a plan. I only knew I wouldn't be calling them. I wouldn't be the one reminding them I existed. I walked until I found a small place called Tina's Diner. The neon sign blinked like a tired eye. Paper turkeys were taped to the fogged-over windows. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and grease filled the air, thick and oddly comforting. A waitress, worn and kind, greeted me with a simple, "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I ordered pumpkin pie and hot tea. I didn't try to explain why I was alone, and no one asked. The pie came warm and soft, a little lopsided, with just the right amount of spice. I took a bite, then another. It was the best pie I'd had in years. Maybe because, for once, I wasn't baking it for someone else. I didn't go straight to a hotel. I just walked. The pie settled warm in my stomach, but the rest of me was numb. Outside, the sky had taken on that flat gray tone. The Pacific Northwest is famous for the kind that makes even the air feel heavy. The pavement was slick, and the cold wind found its way beneath my scarf. Still, I walked. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't go back. Not to the airport, not to that gate. not to the idea that someone might still come. About half a mile down, just past the car rental return lot and a flickering streetlight, I saw a tall, squat beige building with peeling trim and a humming soda machine out front. Valley Inn. Weekly rates. The kind of place you don't really choose unless you need to. But the lights were on, and that was enough. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and instant coffee. A man behind the counter sat watching a football game on a television the size of a cereal box. He barely looked up. "Need a room?" he asked. "Just for one night," I said. "Just me." I caught my reflection in the plexiglass divider behind him. My hair was a little flat from the flight. My cardigan creased. My shoes made good shoes dull from walking. "Room 114, he said, handing over a real key attached to a thin metal tag. End of the row. The room was exactly what I expected. Brown floral bedspread, plastic cups wrapped in paper, a television older than my son. But it was warm, and it was mine. I peeled off my coat and sat on the edge of the bed. My feet ached, my back more. But my heart, which should have been breaking, felt oddly intact. I lay there for a while, not moving, just listening to the low buzz of the heater and the occasional truck grumble down the road. When I finally checked my phone, there were 3 missed calls. 2 from Brian, 1 from Jessica, and 1 text from him. "Mom, where are you? We thought you were coming tomorrow. Call me." No apology, no explanation, just confusion, as if I'd somehow disappeared on them. I didn't reply. I didn't cry either. I just stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then I opened my suitcase, pulled out the small notebook I always traveled, with half shopping lists, half quiet thoughts, and turned to a clean page. At the top, I wrote, "I am not extra. I am not a side dish at someone else's table." I underlined it. Slowly. Twice. It's funny what a motel room can do to a person. Stripped of family, distractions, even expectations, it becomes a kind of chapel. A place where silence rings louder than old arguments and where clarity seeps in, one cold draft at a time. That night, I didn't sleep much. The heater clanked. Someone in the room next door coughed every 15 minutes. Still, I lay there under the rough blanket, eyes open, thinking back not just to the airport, not just to this one slight, but to the 100 tiny ones before it. The birthdays skipped, the voicemails ignored. The years I kept showing up anyway. Christmas, 2 years ago, Jessica had called me just after lunch. "We'd love for you to come, if the roads aren't too icy." I remember the way her voice hesitated over that, like she was offering me a detour, not an invitation. I told her I'd think about it, then hung up and sat by the window for 2 hours while the snow fell. I remembered the time Brian turned 40. I'd saved up for a monogrammed wallet. Sent it early. He responded in a group text. "Thanks everyone for the great gifts." That was it. And Ruby's school play, I had to stream it alone. Hunched over my laptop, wine in hand, throat tight. She didn't know I was watching. No one mentioned it afterward, but I kept showing up. I thought if I just stayed presentient, helpful, uncomplaining, I would matter. That someone would remember I had been the one who taught Brian how to tie his shoes with bunny ears. That I made all his Halloween costumes by hand. That I sat beside him for every spelling bee, every fever, every heartbreak. That I gave him everything and then some. But maybe I had given too much. Morning came in slowly, pale and quiet. I got up before the sun, just like I always had Evan years after retiring. I made motel coffee, weak and bitter, and drank it anyway. I opened the curtains and watched the frost fade from the windows. At 7:12 a.m., another text from Brian. "We got the dates mixed up. We thought you were flying in Friday. Are you okay? Can you still come by? The kids were looking forward to seeing you." Still no mention of the photo. No mention of dinner. No real sorry. I put the phone down. I didn't go to their house. Instead, I got dressed, applied a little lipstick out of habit, and walked 3 blocks to a bank branch I'd noticed the day before. The teller greeted me kindly. "Good morning, Miss Moore. What can I help you with today?" "I'd like to review all of my accounts," I said, "and stop any automatic transfers. Effective immediately." He blinked, but didn't argue. He tapped a few keys and then called in a woman named Natalie, me account manager, apparently. She looked like someone who kept almonds in her purse and did yoga during lunch breaks. "Would you like to tell me why?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "I've spent enough of my life explaining myself." She didn't press, just nodded. Understood. As she made the changes, I stared out the window. A mother buckled her toddler into a car seat. A man walked by with a cane and a paper cup of coffee. A UPS truck idled too long at the curb. Life. In motion. Without me. When she finished, she looked up and said, "There's also a power of attorney on file for your son, Brian. Would you like to keep that active?" "No," I said. "Please remove him." She did. And just like that, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No bolt of lightning. No music swelling. Just a quiet click inside me. Like a door that had been left open too long finally closed. I left the bank lighter than when I walked in. On the way back to the motel, I stopped by a little corner bakery and bought myself a fresh loaf of bread. The clerk smiled and handed me a sample of pear jam on a plastic spoon. He smiled back. I felt intact. Not triumphant. Not healed. But clear. That afternoon, I called Mr. Altmanur, old family lawyer. The man who helped my late husband and me draft our first will nearly 30 years ago. His voice hadn't changed. "I'd like to make some updates," I told him. "Of course, Mrs. Moore. I'm at your service." We set a meeting for the next day. When I hung up, I looked around the small motel room. Brown curtains, faded carpet, my suitcase still open. And yet, for the first time in a long while, the space didn't feel empty. It felt mine. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. Mr. Altman's office was exactly as I remembered its second floor of a converted house downtown, with dark green shutters and a tiny waiting room that smelled like old paper and lemon oil. The same framed photos still hung on the walls. His daughters in braces, a dog in a Santa hat, a fishing boat that I was pretty sure he never actually owned. He stood when I entered. "Mrs. Moore," he said with a small bow of his head. "It's been too long." "It has," I said, and for once, I didn't apologize for the years. We settled into his office-same leather chairs, same ticking clock, same jar of red licorice on the bookshelf. His glasses had gotten thicker, his hair a little grayer, but his voice was steady, respectful, familiar. "So, what would you like to change?" he asked gently, folding his hands. "My will," I said, "and I want to set up a trust. Everything I own, I want it protected. And I want it to go to Ellie. Only Ellie." He didn't blink, just reached for a yellow legal pad. "No more distributions to Brian or Jessica?" "No," I said. "They've received enough. Quietly. For years. I don't need them receiving anything else after I'm gone." "Understood?" We spent the next hour going through every account, every asset. The house, my retirement accounts, the CDs I'd held onto since Tom died, the safe deposit box with my wedding ring, and the faded photo of me and Ellie at the Oregon coast, wrapped in a beach towel, laughing into the wind. When we were done, he leaned back and looked at me. "You've thought this through." "I have." "And Ellie? She'll know why?" "She will." He didn't ask anything more. Men like Altman had heard all the family versions. They'd seen disappointment written into estate plans more times than they could count. But this wasn't about revenge. I wasn't trying to punish Brian and Jessica. I just couldn't give to people who saw me as nothing more than a placeholder anymore. I left his office feeling stripped clean, like a house freshly swept. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was betraying anyone. If anything, I felt like I was finally being honest with myself. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table. The same table where I used to serve Thanksgiving dinner. Same chair where Brian spilled gravy in 2096. Same tablecloth I brought out every November, folded carefully in the linen drawer, still faintly smelling of cinnamon and cloves. This time, though, it was quiet. And mine. I pulled out my notebook and began writing a letter. "Dear Ellie, you once told me I felt like home to you. I don't think you realized what those words did for me. In a time when I felt invisible to almost everyone else, You saw me. Not as someone to be pitied or called on when convenient, but as someone who mattered. I never forgot that. I told her about the airport, the photo, the pie. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. And I told her about the trust. This isn't about punishment. It's about truth. It's about honoring the only person who never made me feel like I was a burden. You. I sealed the letter and addressed it from memory. She was still living in Worcester, Massachusetts, finishing her last year of nursing school. I added a single stamp, walked it to the post office on the corner, and placed it in the outgoing slot with a quiet kind of reverence. The next day, I made soup, lentils, and carrots. My hands still knew the measures by heart. I ate at the table, with one candle lit, not for ambiance, just to mark the space. As if to say, I'm still here. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. 2 mornings later, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in me knew. Grandma? Ellie's voice was hoarse, unsure. It's me. I sat down. I got your letter, she said. I hoped you would. There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know what happened. They told me you canceled the trip. I know. Why didn't you call me? Because I didn't want it to be your burden to carry. But it already is, she said. I've been wondering why everything felt off. Why no one talked about it. Why no one mentioned your name. I closed my eyes. You weren't supposed to carry that weight. Not at your age. I'm glad I know, she said. Because now I can come see you. You don't have to. I want to. And just like that, the silence cracked open. We spoke for 20 minutes. About school. Her stubborn cat. The recipe for cornbread stuffing she still hadn't mastered. I listened to her voice like it was music. Something bright and unscripted and real. Before we hung up, she said, I'm taking the train next weekend. I'll bring the chessboard. Still remember how to play? I never stopped. After she hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat there, one hand on the table, the other still holding the phone. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Not as a caretaker, not as a fallback, but as a person. It had been years since anyone came to visit just for me. The Saturday train pulled into Eugene Station under a low sky. The kind that looked like it might rain but hadn't decided yet. I stood near the benches with my coat buttoned to the top, clutching a small thermos of tea I'd brought along just in case it was cold, or in case I needed something to hold on to. When Ellie stepped off the platform, dragging a duffel bag and scanning the crowd, I saw her before she saw me. Her hair was longer than I remembered, tucked under a knit cap, and her eyes darted like she wasn't sure if this was really happening. Then she spotted me and smiled. Not politely, not out of obligation, but like the sight of me was something she'd been holding her breath for. We hugged for a long time. She smelled like peppermint gum and old library books, and I wanted to freeze the moment, just for a while. She was real. She came. For me. I brought chess, she said into my shoulder. I warmed soup, I said into her hair. At the house, she kicked off her boots at the door like she always had as a child. Same kitchen, she murmured, running a hand across the counter. Same squeaky floorboard. Same woman, I replied, just with better reading glasses. She laughed. And in that moment, it felt less like we were picking up after years apart, and more like we had just stepped into the next room together. Over soup and cornbread, we talked about little things. Her classes, the old cat in her dorm building, my roses that refused to bloom this year. She told me about her professor who hated digital notes and made everyone buy spiral-bound notebooks. I told her about the birds that nested under my eaves each spring. We didn't talk about Brian, or Jessica, or the photo. Later, she pulled the chessboard from her bag-me-old wooden one with the felt-lined pieces that used to sit on the coffee table for years. She still remembered how I arranged the knights slightly turned inward, like they were confiding in one another. We played 2 games. She won both. I pretended to sulk. You always let me win, she accused. No, I said. I used to. Now I just forget my strategies. She looked up from the board. You're still sharp. I didn't answer. Not directly. but I smiled. It felt good to be thought of as anything but fading. That evening, after dishes and tea, she pulled out a manila envelope from her bag. "I found this in my desk drawer last week," she said. "It's yours." Inside were drawings she'd made as a little girl. Crayon sketches of the beach, me, her, a big sun in the corner. One said Grandma's house is my favorite place. I ran my thumb along the paper like it might smudge the memory. She looked embarrassed. "You kept these?" "Of course," I said. "They were the only pictures anyone made of me." We sat in silence. Not heavy, just full, like nothing had to be said. Eventually, she asked, "Do you want to go somewhere tomorrow?" "Where?" "I don't know, somewhere small. Nice. Local. There's a place up the hill. A bakery and a greenhouse. Only open Sundays." She grinned. "Perfect." The next morning, we drove with the windows cracked, letting in the smell of fir trees and damp earth. The bakery had hanging ferns, tea lights in mason jars, and cinnamon rolls the size of softballs. We sat in a corner, sharing one between us, drinking lavender tea, watching the rain streak the windows. She reached across the table and said, "Grandma, I don't want you to feel like you have to be alone now, just because they forgot." I looked at her for a long moment. "I don't feel alone today. I mean, after I go back, I'll be okay," I said. "I've started building something else. A life that doesn't wait on other people to remember it." She nodded. "Still, I want to keep coming. You have school. I have weekends." We smiled. Agreed silently to meet again, not because anyone forced it, but because we wanted to. That afternoon, back at the house, she asked if we could go through the old kitchen drawers. "The one with the tin box," she said. "The one you kept your husband's recipes in." I blinked. "You remember that?" "Of course," she said. "That's where the molasses cookie one lives." We pulled the drawer open. The tin was still there, rusted slightly at the corners, faded blue, still holding decades of notes. His handwriting was there, curly and neat, even on oil-stained index cards. She read some aloud. I read others. At one point, she teared up over the word paprika. I didn't ask why. We baked that afternoon. The molasses cookies came out darker than I remembered, but softer too. She said they tasted like being 7. That night, before bed, she left the door to the guest room slightly cracked. I peeked in just before I turned off the lights. She had fallen asleep with the old chessboard still on the floor and a book open on her stomach. I stood there for a minute longer than I meant to, watching her breathe, grateful. In the quiet of my own room, I lit a candle on the windowsill, one I used to light each holiday, before it felt like no one noticed. This time, I didn't light it for guests. I lit it because the house was full. Not of people, but of meaning. Ellie stayed 2 nights. Before she left, she said, "I don't think this was a visit. I think it was a start." I nodded, because it was. After she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt expectant, like something had shifted inside the walls. Inside me. I didn't go back to pretending everything was fine. I didn't start calling Brian again. I didn't let guilt sneak its way back in. But I did start writing. A little each morning, not memoirs, not letters, just stories. Some about my life, some about the way I wished it had gone. Either way, I wrote as if I mattered. And slowly, day by day, I started to believe I did. The first Monday after Ellie left, I woke up before the sun and brewed a pot of coffee without even thinking. It was the same kind I always bought, dark roast, with a hint of hazelnut, though I'd stopped tasting the difference years ago. As it filled the kitchen with its warm, nutty scent, I realized I hadn't brewed a full pot in months. I'd been making just 1 cup at a time. That morning, I let it fill the carafe. I drank 2 cups. Then I opened the curtains and let the light in. Something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a movie moment where everything changes in one flash of lightning. Number. This was slower. More honest. Like a thaw. I'd been frozen for so long I forgot what it meant to move with purpose. Not for someone else. Not in reaction to being forgotten or ignored, but just because I wanted to. So I pulled out my notebook. Not the one with the grocery lists and old passwords. The good one, the leather-bound journal Tom gave me for our 30th anniversary. I'd never had the heart to write in it. It felt too special, too final. But that morning, I opened to the first blank page and began. I don't know where this goes, I wrote, but I want to remember what it felt like to be alive again. And I did remember. I remembered mornings in our first house, when Tom would whistle while shaving and I'd make toast with too much butter. I remembered how Brian used to crawl into bed with me when he had nightmares, and how I'd hum the same lullaby my mother sang to me. I remembered my own laughter, full and free, before it got replaced with polite silence. I wrote until my hand ached. Then I got dressed, put on real shoes, and walked down to the community library. The building hadn't changed. Still a squat brick structure with ivy climbing up the west side and a metal bench out front that got too hot in the summer and too cold in the fall. But when I stepped inside, something was different. The librarian, a younger woman with bright red glasses and a braid that went halfway down her back, looked up and smiled like she was glad to see me, even though she didn't know who I was. "Looking for something?" she asked. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "A new habit," she laughed. "We've got plenty of those." I signed up for a library card. For the first time in over a decade, I had a fresh card with my name printed neatly on it. It felt like a reintroduction to myself. I borrowed a book on memoir, writing, another on native plants of Oregon, and a third just for fun called Women Who Walked Away and Built Gardens Instead. When I left, she called out, "Hope to see you again, Miss Moore." And I knew I would. That weekend I went to church. Not because I had something to prove or someone to impress, but because I missed the music. I missed the way voices blended when no one was watching. I missed being in a room where people bowed their heads for someone else. I sat in the back row, as I always had, wore my navy dress, didn't try to make conversation. But after the service, a woman in her 60s with silver curls and a firm handshake introduced herself. "Nora," she said. "You're new?" "Returning," I replied. "Well, welcome back." She didn't ask why I'd left. Didn't press. Just smiled and said, "We meet every other Wednesday for tea and hymn practice. You don't have to sing. You just have to like cookies." I went, and she was right. There were cookies, and hymns, and women who talked about their gardens and grandchildren and the weather like it was theology. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. Not yet. But being seen without having to explain myself felt like a kind of grace I hadn't known I needed. At home, I kept writing. Morning pages, memories, fiction. I started printing some out and keeping them in a folder marked "Why Not." I wasn't planning to publish anything. I just liked seeing my thoughts on paper, like planting something and watching it take root. A month passed. Then, too, Ellie kept calling. Sometimes quick check-ins between exams. Sometimes longer talks where we'd both go quiet and let the space between words speak for us. She sent me a photo of her new kitchentini, shared with 2 roommates, cluttered with mugs. She'd taped my letter to the inside of her cupboard door. "I look at it every time I make coffee," she said. I'd started painting again, too. Just watercolors, nothing fancy. I found a set of old brushes in the hall closet and a pad of thick paper in the bottom drawer. One afternoon, I painted the view from my back porch. The pine tree, the shed, the bird bath that had cracked last winter but still held water when it rained. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. One morning in early spring, I received a card in the mail. No return address. Just my name in bold, slanted letters. Ein sighed. "You made your point." It was unsigned. I read it once, then again. Then I folded it in half and tossed it in the recycling. Because yes, I had made my point. And no, I didn't need their permission to keep going. That evening, I lit a candle, sat at my desk, and began a new story not about loss, not about regret, but about a woman who walked away and found her way back to herself. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. I almost didn't check the mail that day. The clouds hung low and sullen, and my knees had been grumbling since morning. But something tugged at me, maybe a whisper of habit, maybe just the quiet that fills a house when you live alone, and so I pulled on my sweater, stepped into my rubber-soled shoes, and walked out to the box at the end of the drive. Among the usual circulars, a donation plea from the local animal shelter, and a plain white envelope. No return address, no handwriting I recognized, but the postmark gave me pause. Liantianling-san. He blinked. Surely a mistake. Some old stamp reused. Some mishap at the post office. Still, I carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table before opening it. My fingers trembled a little, not with fear. Exactly, but with a kind of reverence I didn't understand yet. I peeled the envelope open and slid out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, yellowed slightly. My name was at the top, written in the careful, looping script I hadn't seen in over a decade. Helen. I covered my mouth with one hand. If this reaches you, it means I never had the courage to say what I should have when I had the time. It was Tom's handwriting. No doubt. You always knew more than you let on. I think that was your greatest kindness. You let me pretend I was stronger than I was, braver than I ever managed to be. I don't know how you did it, but you saw the cracks, and you never pushed me to fill them. I read slower. I've made arrangements. Nothing dramatic. Just a few things I tucked away to make sure you'd have the room to breathe when it all gets quiet. I know you'll give more to Brian than he deserves, and I know you'll never ask for anything back. But I hope someday somewhere you'll let yourself be taken care of, even if just a little. I loved you, Helen. I loved the way you folded towels and the way you hummed while making stew and how you always sat closest to the exits in movie theaters. You grounded me. I hope I made you feel safe. I hope I said it enough. And if I didn't, then let this be one more time. You were everything. You still are. Tom. The letter slipped from my fingers, landing gently on the table like a bird landing on water. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I sat back in my chair and stared at the sunlight coming through the curtain. The same curtain he hung for me one spring Sunday in 1998, after I'd complained about glare during breakfast. He used to say, "No one solves a problem faster than Helen with a pencil and a plan," but he was wrong. I just kept going, and he made the going easier. I read the letter again, then again. It didn't answer everything. It didn't explain why he'd never sent it, or how it got lost, or why it showed up now. But it didn't have to. It gave me back something I hadn't known I was still missing. His voice. In the days that followed, I carried that letter with me like a talisman, folded it into my pocket when I went to the library, slid it under my pillow at night. Sometimes, when I felt particularly brave, I'd read a line or two aloud to myself, just to remember the cadence of his words. I told Ellie about it on our next phone call. "You're kidding," she said. "After all these years? I suppose the mail works in God's time," I said. "Or Grandpa's," she whispered. She didn't press, just asked if I felt okay. "I feel remembered," I said. "Not by everyone, but by someone who mattered." And that made all the difference. A week later, I walked into Altman's office again. He looked up, surprised. "Everything all right?" I held out the letter. He read it silently, then looked up with a small nod. "I had a feeling Tom had something extra tucked away," he said. "You know, he came to see me once after you had that bout in the hospital. Said he didn't like how fragile everything felt. He wanted to make sure there were no gaps. He pulled out a folder from the back cabinet and handed it to me. Inside were documents I hadn't known existed, updates to the trust, provisions for long-term care. A small fund labeled Helen's Joys. "What's this one?" I asked. "A discretionary account," he said. "For whatever you want. Travel, books, a ridiculous coat," he said, and I quote, "She'll never spend it unless it's set aside with her name on it. And she'll try to use it on Brian unless I make it airtight." I laughed. Loud and full. "Sounds like him," I said. I left the office that day with wind in my coat and something lighter in my step. Not because of the money, but because of the message. Even gone, Tom had seen me, prepared for me, loved me in a language I finally understood. That night, I wrote my own letter. To him. I didn't plan to send it, of course, just needed to say things. I told him I'd started painting again, that the house was quiet, but not sad, that Ellie was visiting more, that I'd found the library card he helped me apply for when we were newlyweds, buried in an old recipe box. And I told him about the candle, how I still lit it on rainy nights. Not in mourning, but in gratitude. Before I sealed the letter, I added one more line. You were right. I gave too much away, but I finally stopped. And somehow, I'm still here. Then I folded it gently, slid it into an envelope, and placed it between the pages of our old photo album. A kind of resting place, a kind of home. It started with a notice pinned near the checkout desk at the library. Writer's Morning Circle every third Thursday. Coffee, quiet, courage. Beginner's welcome. I didn't take it down right away, just stared at it for a while, pretending I was deciding whether to check out a poetry anthology or another memoir. But those words lingered. Quiet. Courage. Beginner's welcome. That last part made all the difference. By the time I got home, I'd talked myself out of it twice, once while folding laundry, again while reheating soup. I told myself I wasn't really a writer, that I didn't have anything worth sharing, that my life wasn't dramatic enough, or painful enough, or extraordinary in the right kind of way. But then I remembered something Ellie had said not long ago, when I mentioned how small my life felt sometimes. Small doesn't mean meaningless, Grandma, she said. It just means real. So that Thursday morning, I tucked one of my short essays into my purse-printed, neatly, double-spaced, nothing fancy, and made my way back to the library. The room was warm, with sunlight pouring in through high windows and the smell of weak coffee and pencil shavings hanging in the air. There were 6 other people there, all ages. None of them trying too hard. One man wore a fishing vest. A woman with a long gray braid was knitting between turns. I sat at the edge of the table. No one asked me to explain myself. They passed around cookies instead. When it was my turn, I read softly. It was a piece I'd written after Ellie's first visita, reflection on the silence we sometimes mistake for peace, and how being forgotten can feel quieter than grief. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then the woman with the braid said, "That felt true." And I smiled, because I knew what she meant. They didn't clap. It wasn't that kind of group. But they nodded. And in that nodding, I felt something settle. I wasn't performing. I wasn't auditioning for worth. I was sharing, and that was enough. After that morning, I began attending regularly. I started bringing lemon bars. My writing grew braver, not louder, just more honest. I began a piece called The House That Stayed. It wasn't about any one person, but it was about me. The parts I'd hidden, the parts I'd softened, the corners I swept because no one else saw the dust. One day, the librarian with the red glasses pulled me aside after the group. "We're hosting a storytelling night in 3 weeks," she said. "Just a small one, local voices. Would you consider reading something?" I laughed. "Me?" "Yes, you. The group thinks your work should be heard." I wanted to say no. Every instinct leaned toward the quiet comfort of staying behind the curtain. But her eyes were kind, and something in me, something braver, now said yes. The night of the event, I wore my blue-gray sweater and pinned my hair back the way Tom used to like it. The reading room had been strung with soft lights, folding chairs in a semicircle, a microphone on a stand that looked far more official than necessary. There were maybe 20 people, and I was the 4th to read. When I stepped up, my hands trembled a little. I gripped the pages tighter and took a breath. "My name is Helen," I said. "And this is something I didn't know I needed to say until I wrote it." Then I read. The piece was called Stillness Isn't Silence. It was about the Thanksgiving that never happened, about standing at a curb with a pie and nowhere to go, about a photo that said everything they never did, but also about a porch light still being turned on, about finding one's own table even when no one else sets it. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped, and then everyone did. Not out of politeness, not because I'd bared my soul dramatically, but because something I said had made them feel less alone in their own forgotten corners. Afterward, a woman my age hair dyed a soft auburn, eyes ringed with quiet weariness, approached me and said, "That happened to me. Not exactly, but enough. Thank you for saying it out loud." That night, walking home under the cool stars, I felt taller. Not younger, not lighter, just more whole. Ellie called the next day. "So?" she asked. How did you know? I have a sixth sense for these things. I told her about the reading, the applause, the woman with auburn hair. That's beautiful, she said. You know, you're becoming someone I want to be when I grow up. I laughed. I've been waiting to become her for 72 years. Well, she said, it's about time. That weekend, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a hand-drawn illustration me on stage, with a microphone in one hand and a pie in the other. The caption underneath read, Helen Moore, Light Keeper, Pie Carrier, Truth Teller. Ellie had drawn it herself. I framed it and placed it on the mantel, right next to the candle. The house felt different these days. Still quiet, yes, but not empty, not lonely. It echoed now with my own voice. And that was a kind of music I never expected to hear. It was a Saturday morning when the knock came. I was at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries for a cobbler I'd promised to bring to hymn practice. The radio was playing quietly, something soft, familiar, a melody from the 60-second that made my shoulders sway. The sunlight poured through the window, catching the dust like tiny fireflies in the air. Then 3 knocks. Polite. Not urgent, but not casual either. I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands on the dish towel, and walked to the front door. And there they were. Brian, Jessica, standing side by side like they'd rehearsed it in the car. Brian looked older than I remembered, grayer at the temples, thinner around the mouth. Jessica wore sunglasses, though it wasn't particularly bright out. Her arms were folded, but not in anger. More like she didn't know what to do with her hands. Mom, Brian said, his voice softer than I expected. Can we come in? I didn't answer right away, mostly because I was busy listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, to the quiet voice inside me that now had practiced speaking up. Then I opened the door wider. You can come in, I said, but I'm not making coffee. Brian gave a nervous smile. Jessica didn't say anything. They stepped inside, looking around like it was the first time they'd really seen the house. Brian gestured toward the couch. May we? I nodded. Walking past them to the armchair, I always used the one by the lamp with the crooked shade Tom never managed to fix. I sat, hands folded calmly in my lap. Jessica finally took off her sunglasses. Your garden looks nice, she offered. I raised an eyebrow. Thank you. I planted it myself. A beat. Then Brian leaned forward. Mom, he began, we came to apologize. My breath caught not in surprise, but in preparation. I'd imagined this moment before, in the quiet hours. I thought it might feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt unnecessary. I'm listening, I said. He cleared his throat. We've been talking a lot. Since everything. Since you didn't come to Christmas. Since Ellie started visiting you and stopped answering our texts so quickly. At that, Jessica shifted in her seat. I think we didn't realize, Brian went on, how much we'd started assuming you'd always be there no matter how we acted. And I know that Thanksgiving was, well, it was cruel, whether we meant it or not. Jessica spoke now, her voice quiet but steady. It was selfish, and I was part of that. Maybe more than Brian. I didn't want to share the holiday, if I'm honest. I thought I deserved more peace, more space. But I see now what I took away from you. I watched them both. There was no performance in their eyes. No grand gesture. Just 2 people coming face to face with themselves. Why now? I asked. Not accusing, just curious. Brian looked down at his hands. Ellie showed us one of your writings, he said. The one about the photo. And the pie. My chest tightened. She asked us how we could post a full table and not see the empty seat. Jessica nodded. She said she didn't want to grow up thinking that's how you treat someone who raised you. Silence fell. Heavy. Honest. I took a long breath. I appreciate the apology, I said. But I'm not angry anymore. Brian's head snapped up, surprised. I was, I continued. For a while. Not because you left me out, but because I let you. Over and over again. I gave too much, and expected too little. Jessica's eyes welled up. But I've stopped doing that, I said gently. Not out of bitterness. Out of love. For myself. Brian looked like he didn't know whether to cry or smile. I leaned forward just a little. I forgave you long before this moment. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to what was. It means letting go, so I can move forward. Jessica whispered, "Is there still room for us in that forward?" I looked at her, then at Brian, and I thought of the candle, the chess games, the library mornings, the parts of me that had grown not in spite of the distance but because of it. "There's room," I said, "but you'll have to meet me where I am now. I'm not the same woman who waited by the door." They nodded. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like we were pretending to be a family. We were starting to become on different terms. After they left, I stood at the doorway for a long while, watching the dust settle in the hallway light. I didn't feel victorious. I felt peaceful. There's a quiet kind of power in choosing not to shrink after being dismissed, in building something beautiful with the pieces left behind. That afternoon, I brought my cobbler to hymn practice, and when Nora asked why I seemed extra light on my feet, I just smiled and said, "Let's just say..." I finally finished a chapter I'd been carrying for far too long. The letter arrived in late May, tucked between a gardening catalog and an envelope from Social Security. I recognized the handwriting, immediate, small, precise, and unmistakably Jessica's Prupland. The return address was the same house in Chicago I hadn't stepped foot in since the year everything fell apart. I stood at the counter, unopened envelope in hand, for nearly 20 minutes. The tea in my mug went cold. Then I opened it. "Dear Helen, I hope this letter finds you well, and if it doesn't, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I've started this letter a dozen times and thrown away every draft but this one. I'm not writing to rehash the past. You don't owe me forgiveness, and I wouldn't presume to ask for something I haven't earned. But I want to tell you something I should have said long ago. I see now. I see what I didn't before. And more than that, I see what Ellie sees in you." My breath caught. "She talks about you often now. About your writing. The candle. The book launch. The way you make space for people. And lately, I've realized I want her to grow up with more of that in her life. Not just because she admires you, but because I do, too." There was a pause in the letter-blank space, like Jessica herself had paused before writing the next part. "Ellie is graduating. Top of her class. She's giving the student address. And she asked me, specifically, to make sure you were invited. Not by text, not by her, but by me. Because she says that's part of what healing means. If you can come, it would mean the world to her, to all of us. But even if you can't, I wanted you to know this. Thank you for loving her well, even when we didn't deserve your grace. With sincerity, Jessica." I read the letter 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't quite believe it. Not long ago, Jessica wouldn't have noticed if I'd fallen off the earth. Now she was inviting me into something sacred. Ellie's moment. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled down the small blue notebook where I'd started writing things I wanted Ellie to know someday. It was filled with bits of advice, quotes I loved, and small memories I hadn't yet told her, like the time she fell asleep on my lap during her mother's bridal shower, or the poem she recited at age 6 with chocolate on her chin. And now she was graduating. That night, I called her. "Hello, my light," I said. She laughed. "Hi, Grandma. You got it, didn't you?" I did. "And I'll be there." She was quiet for a second, then exhaled. "Good. Because I wrote something in my speech about you. You'll know it when you hear it." The trip to Chicago felt different this time. I didn't pack gifts or expectations, just a soft scarf, my best shoes, and a photo of Tom tucked into my purse. I wore the dress I'd bought after the book launch, soft navy, just enough to feel like my better self. Jessica met me outside the auditorium. She looked older, softer. We didn't say much at first, just exchanged a long look and the kind of hug that doesn't erase pain, but places a balm over it. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for asking," I replied. Brian was there too. He shook my hand like it mattered, and introduced me to neighbors I'd never met as my mom, Helen. When we took our seats, I chose the second row knot front and center, but close enough to see Ellie's eyes. She looked radiant in her cap and gown, long curls spilling out from under the black mortarboard, eyes scanning the crowd with the confidence of someone who had found her roots again. When she stepped up to the podium, the room fell quiet. Her voice was clear, bright. She spoke of hard work and late nights and laughter and dreams. Then she paused. "And I want to end with this," she said, glancing toward me. "There's someone here who taught me that strength isn't always loud, that sometimes it's choosing not to shout, but to stay, to build, to light a candle instead of cursing the dark." My eyes welled up. She reminded me that you can be soft and still be unshakable, that grace isn't weakness, and that the quietest people sometimes carry the deepest wisdom. I could barely see the stage through my tears. Ellie closed her speech, and the crowd rose in applause. And I, Helen Moore, widow, mother, baker of cobblers, accidental author, rose too. Not just from my seat, but into the life I'd waited decades to grow into. After the ceremony, Ellie ran to me first. She didn't say anything, just held on, and I held her back. Because this wasn't just her graduation. It was mine too. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. When I got home from Chicago, the house welcomed me like an old friend, quiet, gentle, and unhurried. There were no banners, no confetti, no champagne flutes. Just the soft ticking of the hallway clock and the slight creak of wood under my shoes. I placed the program from Ellie's graduation on the mantel beside her drawing of me and the old candle. For a while, I just stood there, absorbing the stillness. After all the noise, all the love, all the tears, there's something holy about being alone again, but not lonely. That next morning, I sat on the back porch with my coffee and let the Oregon spring unfold slowly around me. The trees had filled out, full and proud. Birds hopped across the grass like tiny messengers. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and a child laughed in response. Life kept moving, and so did I. 2 days later, Emma called again. I smiled when I saw her name by now. Her voice was as familiar to me as my own thoughts. "This one's a little outside the library's usual scope," she said. "But the high school in town is doing something new. They're starting a community storytelling project. They want local elders to come in and talk to students about resilience. Not history lessons, not back-in-my-day tales, but real stories about becoming." "Becoming?" I repeated. "Yes, about how becoming never stops, even at 70 or 80. That word stayed with me all day. Becoming. Not arriving, not finishing, becoming. So the following week, I walked into Maplewood High School with my blue sweater, my reading glasses, and a folder of notes I hadn't shown anyone. The classroom smelled like pencil shavings and teenage energy, sweet, restless, half bored, and half curious. The teacher, Miss Callahan, greeted me with a warm handshake and a whispered, "Thank you for coming." There were 17 students. Some sat up straight. Others slouched behind hoodies. One boy had earbuds in until she snapped her fingers gently at him. But I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I'd been quiet in louder rooms than this. I introduced myself the way I always do now. "My name is Helen. I'm not here to give you advice. I'm here to tell you a story." They perked up a bit. I told them about Thanksgiving, about the photograph I wasn't in, about how I thought being silent was noble and how I was wrong. I told them how I wrote my first essay at a dining room table with a broken lamp, how I learned to bake again after forgetting the taste of sweetness, how I built something new after everything old fell apart. And then I said this: you will have moments in life when you feel invisible, when you love people who don't see you, when you give more than you should and receive less than you hoped. And in those moments, you'll be tempted to shrink, to disappear politely. Don't. I looked at them, really looked. Don't disappear, even if you're quiet, even if no one claps. Stay, speak, write, cook, build, light something, because the world needs your story, even if it doesn't know it yet. One girl, freckles, ponytail, sweatshirt that said, "Be kind anyway," raised her hand. "Did you ever want to give up?" I nodded. "Oh yes, many times. But I've learned that giving up feels different than resting. And what I really needed was rest and courage and a second wind. They stayed with me the whole hour, and when it ended, several lingered. A boy with chipped black nail polish said, "I want to write about my grandpa now. He died last year, but I think I finally have something to say." Another whispered, "You sound like someone who really lived." I walked out of that building lighter than I walked in, not because I'd changed the world, but because I'd planted something. That evening, I lit my candle as I always do. I thought of Tom, of Ellie, of Jessica. I thought of Walter and Agnes and Mabel. I thought of that girl in the hoodie who'd scribbled a note on her desk as I spoke. And I realized this was never just about being remembered. It was about remembering myself, so I could help others do the same. Becoming. Still. Always. It started with a casserole dish and a question. Nora, my friend from hymn practice, stopped by one afternoon with her famous tuna bake and said, "Would you ever consider hosting one of those community suppers like they do upstate?" I blinked. "Community supper?" She nodded, setting the hot dish on my counter like it belonged there. You know, big table, mismatched chairs, paper name tags, folks from all walks of life. No speeches, no agenda. Just stories and stew. I'd heard of them, but only vaguely. It sounded like something younger folks did in hip cafes with kombucha on tap. Not something a 72-year-old widow in Maplewood would take on. But Nora just smiled. "You're the one person I know who makes people feel safe enough to talk." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote one word at the top. Table. It's a small word, but it holds so much. In my life, the table had been where birthdays were sung. Arguments flared, pies cooled, and silences stretched. It had been a battleground and a sanctuary. So I decided to try. We called it the Third Thursday Table. Emma helped make flyers. The community center gave us space. Ellie designed the Lagoa candle in the center of a wooden table. And we invited everyone. No RSVP. Just show up. Bring a dish if you like. Bring a memory if you can. That first evening, we had 12 people. By the third month, there were over 30. There was no head of the table. Everyone passed the bread, the butter, the stories. Walter from the writing group shared how he met his wife at a skating rink in 1958. A high school senior named Layla admitted she didn't know how to talk to her grandma anymore and wasn't sure if it was too late. An immigrant woman named Thao, who barely spoke English, brought homemade spring rolls and passed around a photo of her father in a soldier's uniform. No one left early. No one was on their phone. People cried softly, laughed loudly. Saturday, in comfortable silence. The table worked like soil holding, grounding, nourishing. After one gathering, a man I hadn't met before mid-50s, rough hands, eyes like winter, stood next to me as I wiped down tables. He didn't say much at first. Then, "I haven't eaten at a table with people in 6 years." I paused. "I'm glad you did tonight." He nodded, his voice catching. "Me too." That night, after everyone had gone and the chairs were stacked, I sat down by myself at the very edge of the table and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't know who I was thanking exactly. Maybe the universe. Maybe the Helen I used to be, the woman who thought she'd been left behind, not knowing she was just being redirected. A few weeks later, I received a letter in a child's handwriting. "Dear Miss Helen, thank you for the spaghetti and for not laughing when I said I miss my dog more than my dad. You make me feel like my words are not dumb. I think you're kind. Love, Peter, age 9. I placed it next to Ellie's drawing and my candle. Somehow, it belonged there, too. These days, the table feels like a living thing. Not just wood and legs, but something sacred. Something pulsing. It reminds me that connection isn't a grand gesture. It's a shared bowl, a patient ear, a story told without fear of being interrupted. It's a light left on, a seat pulled out, a second helping. We're not meant to carry our stories alone. Sometimes, we just need a table. And someone willing to listen. It started with the potatoes. Nora forgot to salt them. Now, normally, that wouldn't be a headline-worthy event. We all forget things. Heaven knows I've brewed coffee without water, and once tried to put my house keys in the refrigerator. But with Nora, it was different. She'd been cooking her mother's scalloped potatoes every Thursday for over 30 years. The recipe was etched into her bones. And yet, as we stood side by side in the community kitchen, she held the salt in her hand and looked at me like she wasn't sure what it was for. "I'm sorry. What was I doing?" she asked, her voice light, almost joking. I smiled. We were finishing the top layer. She blinked. "Right. Of course. Sorry. I didn't mention it again. But that night, when she said goodbye, she called me Margaret. My name's not Margaret, and Nora knows that. Or, she used to." Over the next few weeks, there were more little slips. She left her tote bag at the library, forgot the words to our favorite hymn, repeated stories she'd just told. One day, she didn't show up for the third Thursday table at all. I found her 2 hours later, sitting on a bench near the old bakery, staring at the sky like it held an answer she couldn't quite remember the question for. She looked at me, startled. "Oh, I think I was heading somewhere, wasn't I?" I nodded. "You were. And now you're here. That's enough." We sat on the bench together for a long while. Eventually, she whispered, "It's happening, isn't it?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." She was quiet. Then, "I'm scared." "So am I said. "Sometimes, truth is the kindest thing you can offer." From that day on, we did things slower. We labeled the kitchen cupboards. We made cards with faces and names of her favorite people, her sister, her nephew, the librarian who always saved her a large print mystery novel. And on the first Thursday of the next month, I moved the table to her house. Just for two. We lit a candle, we set the plates. We talked or didn't. Some days, she was sharp as a pin. Other days, she faded like old ink on a letter never mailed. But she was still Nora, my Nora, and I stayed. One afternoon, she looked at me with wide, clear eyes and said, "I'm afraid of the day I won't know you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Then I'll remind you. Every time." "As many times as it takes," she cried. And I did too, because memory is a funny thing. It holds us together until it doesn't. And when it begins to fray, what's left isn't nothing. It's presence. It's patience. It's love. That week, I wrote a new piece in my notebook, for when you forget. It wasn't a letter. It was a promise. I tucked it into a small scrapbook I started for Nora, filled with photos, her favorite song lyrics, notes from the community, and recipes written in her handwriting. On the front, I taped a label, a place to come back to. Ellie helped design the cover. "You know, Grandma," she said, "this is what grace looks like." I smiled. "No, sweetheart. This is what friendship looks like. Sometimes, we think legacy is about being remembered by many, but maybe, just maybe, it's about being remembered by one. And when that memory fades, it's about being worth remembering again and again and again. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. Spring arrived quietly. No sudden blooms. No parades of daffodils. Just the gentle thaw of soil, the patient unfolding of buds, and the kind of light that lingers longer each evening, not bold, but certain. I rose each day with purpose, but no longer with urgency. I walked slower, spoke softer, and listened more. Nora had moved into the assisted living residence just outside Maplewood. The decision wasn't sudden, it was made over many cups of tea, soft conversations, and tearful embraces. She didn't fight it. Maybe because she trusted I'd still come. And I did. Every Thursday. Sometimes I read to her. Sometimes she just held my hand. Sometimes she forgot my name but smiled anyway. Like something deep inside her still knew I belonged. I began keeping a journal for those visits, not for me, but for her. I called it the Thursday Notebook. In it, I wrote what we talked about, what we ate, what the sky looked like. I drew pictures of her old backyard, wrote down her favorite quotes, and pasted in little scraps a leaf, a fabric swatch, a piece of ribbon from the time she laughed at a birthday hat. She didn't always understand it, but she always turned the pages with care, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the third Thursday table continued. It had moved from my kitchen to the church basement, then to the library, and now fittingly it had its own little room at the community center. A long oak table donated by a carpenter whose wife said, "He hasn't touched wood since he lost his brother." This brought him back. Ellie had taken over as co-organizer. She brought a fresh spirit to the space fairy lights. Story prompts written on colored paper. Playlists of gentle jazz and old gospel. She called it the table that keeps growing. I smiled the first time I heard her say that aloud. Because it had. One evening, as we packed up leftover chili and stacked mismatched mugs, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think you would have done any of this if they hadn't forgotten you that Thanksgiving?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, this tall, curious, kind young woman who used to crawl under my table with markers and a mouthful of goldfish crackers. Then I said, "Number I wouldn't have. That moment was my undoing. But sometimes, when something breaks, it makes room for light to get in." She nodded, thoughtful. "So, maybe grace starts with grief?" "Sometimes," I said. "And sometimes grace is just showing up again, even after." That night, I sat at my desk and finally opened the Word document labeled Book 2. It had been sitting there, blinking, half finished, half forgotten. This one wasn't about being erased. It was about choosing to remain visible, about how quiet people rebuild louder lives, not with shouting but with showing up, about Nora, about Ellie, about the boy with chipped nail polish who now volunteers at a senior center, about the girl in the hoodie who started a podcast about generational courage, about tables and candles and casseroles passed hand to hand. I called it The Long Light, What Comes After the Quiet. When I typed the last sentence, I didn't cry. I just sat still and let the quiet settle like warm dust on a bookshelf. Sometimes, healing isn't fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes, it's a Thursday evening with soup and shared stories. A bench at the park where someone remembers your face but not your name. A letter from a child who calls you safe. A journal page that says, "Today, you smiled at the daffodils." The day I sent the manuscript off, I bought 2 bouquets, one for Nora's room, and one for myself. Because love, once planted, doesn't stop blooming. Even when it isn't always recognized, even when it fades, it still grows. That fall, I lit a candle on the windowsill, something I now do every equinox. Not for grief, but for gratitude. Gratitude for the love that came back. For the strength I found when I thought I'd been emptied. For Nora, who now hums softly even when she doesn't know the tune. For Ellie, who carries my fire forward. And for the quiet truth I've come to understand over all these years, that forgiveness is not about forgetting what was lost, but honoring what remains. That love, in its purest form, doesn't keep score. It holds space. It lets go. And sometimes, it even remembers for 2. In the hush of my home, I whispered once more, not to anyone in particular, but maybe to the girl I once was. Standing alone that Thanksgiving day. You were never truly left behind. You were being led forward. And somehow, I believe she heard me. Because in the end, what matters most is not the clarity of memory, but the clarity of heart. And my heart has learned this, that to love deeply is to forgive quietly, that to endure is to embrace change without bitterness, and that nothing truly loved is ever lost. Not to time, not to silence, not even to forgetting. So tonight, if you're sitting in the dark wondering if anyone sees you, hears you, remembers you, let me say this. You are not invisible. You are becoming. Still. Always. If this story touched something in you, maybe a quiet ache, a memory, or a moment you thought you'd forgotten, I hope it also reminded you that healing is possible, that presence is powerful, and that the smallest light can warm the longest night. Share your own story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear what you've overcome. And if stories like this speak to your soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. There's more light ahead, one quiet choice at a time.